So before I get into today's video, which is going to be Job chapter 2, I thought I would just mention some things that came up recently. Um, I do some homeschool programs, and they're Christian, and somebody that I know through one of these programs is uh, I don't even remember when it came up or how it came up, but I figured out that she doesn't like NASA and she doesn't believe all the NASA stuff, which is crazy that it is so common even in Christian settings. Every single time pretty much that we get together, I'll at least see one or two kids wearing NASA stuff, and somebody will get up and start preaching about some BS about, oh well, the moon. They try to spin it too to like glorify God. They're Man, it's so cheesy. They'll say like, the same way that it's Jesus's light shining through you, the moon is really the light reflected from the sun. Yeah, that's wrong. That's incorrect, and it actually goes against what the Bible says, which is that the moon is its own light. But anyways, I mean, why am I even talking about this? Well, I recently had a conversation with this person because we both were just like lamenting at like, every time people talk about outer space stuff, I get triggered. Um, I guess her husband kind of gives her a hard time for it. This is really common actually for one partner doesn't really go along with they they don't buy it. They're more, normie mainstream Christian, but either the husband or just the wife will be into flat earth. When I told my wife about that, about flat earth for the first time, she just said, "Oh yeah, I could see that being true." But we don't really talk about it very much, so I don't know what her opinion is on it. But anyway, so I was talking to this friend of mine so I know there are other Christians out there that at first glance you wouldn't think like, oh, you look like a conspiracy theorist. But there's tons of Christians out there that they don't believe in NASA stuff. And she was talking about gap theory, which is not something that I've really researched or thought of. It has something to do with looking into Genesis and potential, I guess, potentially long periods of time that are just not talked about. And I think that's interesting, maybe where the idea of titans came from. No, I'm not saying that this stuff is true or has biblical basis, just fun ideas to think about. And even my friend said, like, I don't prescribe to everything that gap theory people talk about, but she was just interested in the idea. Like, are there things mentioned in Genesis that are kind of glossed over that are like thousands of year periods? And that makes me think of like the big tree eras, and maybe there were times when time moved like really slowly. And I don't know, I thought that was interesting. I guess to paraphrase, it had something to do with the Earth being formless era, something around there, that maybe there's a gap. And not that it's missing, just that maybe we're not given all the details, and that things happened. Just because it's not written in the Bible doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And maybe people just didn't know about it, or we've lost it to time. Who knows? But I thought it was interesting enough to share. Um, I think that there was another reason that I brought that up, but now I can't really think of it. So maybe I'll just get into Job. Chapter 2. This is another really interesting chapter from the Bible, and it's kind of just a continuation of chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1, it's like bad news after bad news after bad news for Job. His life crumbles around him, and he doesn't curse God. He says that God giveth, God taketh away. And chapter 2 is kind of just the next bad news. So let's get into it. Again, there was a day when the sun. Okay, so now that I'm reading this, I'm getting sparked um, another idea that I've been having. Job seems like really old when this stuff was happening. what era was Job alive to be a part of? It almost seems like the story of Job was passed down and eventually retold and finally written down at some point. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas here. But what my question is, what is the time period where Satan is just going and casually having conversations with God? What era are we in when that happens? So I'm going to start reading again. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. I'm just asking because can Satan still do that today? Can Satan still go have counsel with God in this way, and the sons of God getting together? I'm just curious when this is going on. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading. This is actually kind of a short chapter. Verse 2. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him, to destroy him without cause. I think it's interesting here how in the last chapter it was clear that God just gave permission for Satan to go do those things. He didn't do it, and then Satan went and did it. But here it's almost like God is taking credit here, and maybe that just has to do with God is showing that he could have stopped him if he wanted to. I just think it's interesting here that God is, it seems like apologetic, like God is, it almost seems like he's taking credit, but it was clear in the previous chapter that he just allowed it to happen. Because just where he talks about, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. Anyways, next verse. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. What a supportive wife Job had. Foreshadowing. I just read this casually this morning when I was looking stuff up. So I guess Job remarries in the end and has like a new family and stuff. So I don't know of what the fate is of Job's wife, but she's just coming in hard, not very supportive, and shows you the mindset of people though at the time, because people would assume, and that's a big part of the book of Job, is going over people's mindset, which is basically, well, Job, none of this bad stuff would have ever happened to you if God didn't hate you, basically is what they think. They think that the only way that this is possible, that all your life could crumble around you and you're covered in sores and stuff, well, God must really hate you. That is the way that people thought, and still think today. A lot of people. They think that if bad stuff happened to you, that it must be deserved. And, if good stuff happens to you, how many people talk about karma like it's... So there is a type of karmic... It's more of like a law to this place, a biblical law to this place, where God says that evil undoes itself. That is, I believe, the root and the truth of karma. But people treat it as its own thing. That's not true. And more in a way of, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. That's not really true. Good people suffer in this life a lot. And I think that's why a lot of people connect with Job, in that life is full of all sorts of meaningless suffering. Meaningless from our perspective, and that's a part of life. I find it comforting that somebody's willing to tell the truth. Job feels like a very truthful part of the Bible because I can relate to it. Yeah, I can relate to, man, wouldn't it be easier if we were just never born and we could just jump to the end, jump to heaven? Um, I don't know if he's taking a more metaphysical, like never existing at all. I appreciate existing a lot, and I think existing at all is a miracle. And although I'm not suicidal, I can relate to the feeling of having enough with this life. And I mean, I haven't really suffered as badly as Job has. I'm very blessed, but life is full of seemingly unnecessary and unfair suffering, but there's so much in the Bible that tells us to expect those things. So it shouldn't shake you if you believe in the Bible and you believe in God. You should know that that's to be expected. But yeah, Job's wife, brutal. Verse 10, but he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. I think it's nice there that even Job is giving her a little grace, saying he's not outright calling her a fool. He's saying that you're speaking like a fool. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. Wonder how they were all communicating and how they were making appointments together. The logistics of that are kind of interesting, because it sounds like they're friends from faraway lands, and Job was like a super important person, so this sounds like political stuff. Like, these people were probably kings in their own right, I would imagine, or close to it. And the end here is really interesting. Not many people have friends like this today, and life is so different today that, have you noticed that the way that society is built, that people aren't given proper opportunities to do anything, and the rat race machine is chugging along, and all of us are expected to play that game, to pretend like that game is the most important thing. If something crazy tragic happens in your life, you should be able to take a month off like nothing. Like, we shouldn't have to fight for these things. This should just be a normal part of life. Like, oh, he just had something tragic happen in his life. Like, let him be. But that's not a thing. Everybody's expected to wake up the next day and go continue your job, and you still are expected to pay your rent on time, no matter the circumstances. So when I just read stuff like this, I think it's interesting to think that, think of the societies that could exist where stuff like this is even possible. So let me read. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon their heads towards heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Yeah, it's just hard for me to understand. I mean, to put myself in a type of society where that type of thing is possible. Imagine a place where really important people could go to their friends and sit in silence around him for 7 days. It's just a different time, and important things mattered more, and people had so many more personal freedoms, and there wasn't as much of a rat race back then. Fake matrix society. It really, life used to be a lot more about things that mattered. And anyways, that is it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. God bless everyone.